Welcome to this recorded webinar. Today we're talking about breaking silos and how to communicate effectively, mastering individual communication for seamless collaboration. I have here with me Greg and Brian from Arcadia Cognerati, a small yet agile team of human behavior pattern recognition and analysis experts who believe that risk should be mitigated, not managed. But I will let them to introduce themselves, and then we dive into some very interesting conversation questions. So go ahead, Greg, would you like to give a short intro?
Thank you. I'm Greg Williams, the president and founder of Arcadia Cognerati. We're excited to have a strategic partner with Dextego, and I'm looking forward to answering some questions from Ioanna today on this call.
Yeah, and I'm Brian Marren, the Senior VP of Operations for Arcadia. And Ioanna, I want to have you introduce us more often. It sounds much better when you're introducing us versus when we introduce ourselves. So I might have to hire you just to do that sometimes.
I would agree.
The MC.
Yeah.
And for anyone who doesn't know me, I'm Ioanna, the co-founder and CEO of Dextego, an AI coach for soft skills development, such as communication, collaboration, and leadership. So without further ado, my first question for you guys is, how do you define silos in an organizational context? And what, in your experience, are some common challenges that they create when it comes to effective communication and collaboration?
Yeah, and that's a great question. So picture in your mind a farm setting in a silo that has grain. It's a big chimney and it only goes one way. It goes from the ground up into the air. And silos form when groups or departments talk only within and amongst themselves, and they don't consider the mission or the overarching goals of the business. And in that manner, they're not mission focused. So as a business leader, when I cannot hear from all available stakeholders, I won't make the best, most informed decision possible on that topic. And that's dangerous and it's costly. It's like being in Las Vegas and walking out, leaving money or chips on the table that I didn't even know were in play.
So what are, I guess, some of the early signs, like red flags, that individuals can recognize in order to address those issues? Like, what are the main factors contributing to the development of silos?
So there can be a number of reasons why they form. And sometimes I've actually seen it more so out of frustration, where you've got a good high functioning team, maybe a group of folks, and they're trying to get things done and they're moving, and oh God, this other department is always so slow and they don't respond fast enough, or we got to get to the engineers and they always take their time, whatever the issue is. So sometimes we're forced out of purely frustration trying to either get a project across the line or get their information up. So that's one way I've seen. And then also there's some ways where the real, I look at that's a good problem to have, right? Because it's just people trying to work hard and get done faster, right? The other one, the negative one, is really when it's someone trying to be sort of they're the owner of all the information, they're the keeper of all the secrets. It sort of gives them a little bit more power or say in the organization. So they don't want to share laterally across because they think it kind of makes them look better and kind of it gives them a leg up on maybe some of the internal competition within the team. And those two can be addressed similarly in terms of how to get it across. But some of those barriers are like literally just you're getting frustrated and you notice I'm going to start bypassing people because they're not getting their job done fast enough, or I'm not getting the response I need, so I'm going to go directly. I might jump a few levels of the chain of command here and go straight to the source. And although that may be necessary for certain objectives or certain projects at certain times, you got to be careful because you fall into that. And then once you establish that line of communication directly up, it's hard to ever go back to how things are supposed to be. So you can see if you're already doing that, you know what, maybe I'm seeing these barriers and these silos starting to be built. So let's address it now before, like Greg said, before that grain silo reaches all the way up and you're never going to get out of it.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And I've definitely seen that happening in organizations. It's a clear sign, I would say. Sometimes it stems from not being patient enough to like train others, right? But how do you think we can actually break these silos, and what are some strategies across the board, like whether the company is small, big, different industries? What are some tips people can take away from today's webinar?
Yeah, and I would say think about the airline industry with the latest news that you hear people acting up. Those problems don't get easier at 35,000 feet. So handle them now, handle them on the ground, and handle them when they're in progress. Brian and I were in a situation where we went around a Fortune 100 company and deliberately asked each group of professionals that were in there, where do the silos exist? And every one of the groups pointed at the previous group. And so yeah, everybody considers the silos occurring somewhere in the business, but they never shine the light on themselves. So I would start with open, honest, transparent communication. To me, that's one thing, not three. I always try to communicate persuasively in any communication, whether it's in person or in a text. And I make sure that when I'm hitting send on a message, that I'm making a request, not a demand. I'm taking the time to choose my words wisely. No jargon, no slang. Also, I like signal brevity. You get to the point right up front. And we call that bluff, Brian and I, and a lot of former military people might remember that as well. Bottom line up front. And if I'm in person, the same rules, except now I want to make sure that my tone and my inflection and my body language all sync up, because if my body message and my word message aren't congruent, I'm going to be seen as untrustworthy. And that's going to lose, I'm going to lose more people's positive communications in a meeting than I would have ever understood before. And again, we're leaving money on the table that I didn't even know was in play.
And I am that type of person that likes to address things on the spot, as you mentioned, but I know a lot of people aren't,
Right.
And communication styles differ. So what are your tips in terms of adapting to others' communication styles in order to be able to effectively engage with other team members from various backgrounds and actually resolve the issue before it happens?
So that's a great question, because that's what everyone needs to know. It's like, all right, I have this information, but maybe that person isn't receiving it, or they have a certain way that they like being talked to or something. And you can get into all kinds of different details about it, but one of the things I always talk about when it comes to human behavior and humans is, people are actually the same all over the world, right? If I look for the similarities in someone or the similarities in a situation, it's a little bit easier for me to come across correctly, because there's different relationship dynamics in play. Is this person a peer? Are they a supervisor? Are they a subordinate? So each one of those has their own little nuanced ways of talking. But if I just look at it, how would I want to receive this message? How do I want to be talked to? And sometimes putting that filter on helps us choose the correct words. And then, kind of like Greg mentioned earlier with it, when I'm connecting with someone, whether it's a request or I'm telling them to do something, I always try to say, look, I'm looking for your insight on this. So it would be, Ioanna, you have a unique insight coming to the United States, from Greece, does this make sense to you? Because you're going to see this a little bit differently. So if I highlight the fact that you're giving me a different perspective, it adds value to what I'm doing. But two, it shows you that I'm valuing your opinion and your perspective, even if it's not going to be that different, even if I kind of already have a good idea what you're going to say, right? Allowing you to have your say in that moment, it makes that other person feel good. It makes it that they're contributing. So now I'm kind of getting everyone on the same page without telling everyone, hey, I'd like to get you on the same page here, right? So just by doing it naturally.
I love that. And I remember you mentioned to me another day, like people want to have their say, not their way. That is so true.
That's one sorry, go ahead, Greg.
No, I would add to that. Both of you are on exactly the right track. Remember the brain's neurochemistry. When I'm getting positive feedback about an idea that I took time to present, then that gives me a positive neural pathway that makes me want to produce in the future. And it makes me want to take that time. So why wouldn't you do it? Why wouldn't you catch somebody doing something right?
Yes, and positive reinforcement can go a long way.
Absolutely.
I remember, like, back at college, I studied psychology and I did research with rats, and all we did was just positive reinforcement with like having them to eat and asking them to do certain things, and it's just a fact. It's just
Right.
what it is. You're so right. So okay, in a great universe where everything is completely fun when it comes to communication, no one has any misunderstandings, but in our world, unfortunately, there are a lot of those, and they are a big obstacle in breaking down silos. So in your opinion, how can individuals enhance their active listening skills to ensure clear understanding between them, even if they're from diverse backgrounds?
That's another great question. And I'll go international on you. So I'm in Afghanistan, and I'm speaking to a village elder, and the village elder has an interpreter and a cultural attaché, and I have a cultural attaché. And the problem is mine is from Texas, and he doesn't believe the information that's being transmitted, and he drops the, hey, that dog don't hunt, to the other translator. And apparently in Texas, that means I don't think you're being absolutely truthful with me. So it's a bit of jargon. It's a colloquial expression only known to a few people. So I had to stop the interview for a second. And I said to the other cultural attaché, does the village elder know what he just said? And he says, yes, sir, of course he does. There's something wrong with this man's dog. Well, that threw the entire conversation sideways. And I want you to think back about Vegas, leaving that money on the table when we don't have to. So two-way communication starts with active listening. And I need to consider the receiver's communication strengths and weaknesses. And most people are stuck on transmit. And think of the old radios where I've got to dial it in. And if all I'm hearing is static, then I'm going to come up with what I think is going on, and I may be far afield. So don't attempt to change the other person's style. Adapt your style in order to communicate in the manner that's being best accepted by the receiver. And that'll only take a question or two and a little bit of research. And I've never been in an interview, even an impromptu interview, where I didn't do some modicum of research before I found myself there. And I would also take time to paraphrase what I think I'm hearing and give it back to my counterpart. Now that means that if there's a correction necessary, I can correct in stride. I don't have to wait a long time and find out the dog doesn't hunt, right? So in that manner, I can ensure that we both have a common understanding of each topic before going forward to the next topic. And then finally, I highly encourage questions. I ask for questions, and I certainly ask specific questions to ensure that I understood what was being transmitted. And when I'm in person, I make sure that I give my full attention to the speaker. I'm facing the speaker, and I'm using my facial expressions and body language that indicate not only that I'm listening, but I'm understanding what that speaker says. That's hugely important to make sure that we get to the point where communication is efficient and effective.
I'll take us a little tangent here because you talked about the dog and it made me think of a recent scenario where I went to Florida and I went to like a place where they were training dolphins, and all sorts of tourists were there from all around the world. So there was a family and they wanted to play with the dolphins, like they would do some tricks. So there was a trainer telling them, for instance, put your hand up, like do this, do that. And they wouldn't really understand, I think, the timing, like when they had to do something because of the language barrier, that the dolphins started getting super confused. So the tricks weren't actually successful. And the trainer, understanding that, she has a responsibility both on the tourist side and on the dolphins side. So she had to stop it. And I found it actually very responsible of her, although disappointing for like the tourists. They would not be able to figure that out at that point in time. So to your point about also the translator, I think there's just this responsibility when you do have the understanding or the empathy or just the active listening skills that it takes to protect the groups that don't.
You're exactly right, Ioanna, and you got to slow time down. You
Yeah.
have to understand that we speak at a very specific rate, all humans on the face of the planet, when we're fluent. But we hear and listen and process information tens of hundreds of times, sometimes faster. So the idea is that you're already way ahead of the person rather than staying in the moment with the person and making sure there's full and complete understanding. You're not going to have fun if you don't have complete understanding. You're not going to make money if you don't have full and complete understanding.
Absolutely. And we just talked about miscommunications, which sometimes can be resolved, but sometimes they lead to conflict. So in the case that conflict arises while trying to break those silos, how can individuals address them in a constructive way to turn them into opportunities for improved collaboration?
So I love it when it comes to sort of these conflict in the workplace or situations that could, because if you look at it in the right way, it'll change your mindset a little bit. And one way to do that is conflict is actually good, right? When you're, hey, I want to do things this way. Well, no, I think it should be done this way. Well, my team has this. And if you can get together and communicate, what comes from that, if it's positive, is going to be a better way, because, you go, well, I now have to take into your considerations. You now have to take into mine. So if I don't always address it as a negative thing, I look at it that conflict is what's going to make this process or product or service, whatever it is that we're doing, it's going to make it better. If I keep that sort of mindset, it helps. And then right off the bat, one of my favorite things to tell people is always make it about the problem, not about the person. Because of our different cognition biases, we have something called fundamental attribution error. So if I'm upset at your team, Ioanna, maybe you're not meeting your deadline, all of a sudden that turns into, yeah, and then, Ioanna, she's coming in late, and then, she messed up my coffee order, and then I don't like the dress she's wearing. So we attribute all of these things that don't actually matter, and we wouldn't care about if we were having good communication. So the idea is that if I focus on the problem, and if I can get us together, even though this is going to be a difficult conversation, I can say, if we outline right at the beginning, okay, here's what I see as the problem. What do you see as the problem? Oh, okay. Now we can get on the same page of what that is. Now we're working towards that. And it's not about me and you in the situation. It's about whatever the issue is. So that's one kind of simple trick I always try to keep people. The mindset of conflict is not necessarily a bad thing. And two, always make it about the problem, not about the person.
And I would add one thing, and Brian is spot on. I like his take on this one. Every once in a while, you're going to run into a classic obstructionist. And in business, you cannot have, we're not talking about the 13th person. The 12 are agreeing, and the 13th is supposed to create some discourse so you can discuss it and figure out if this is really a good plan, because you don't want a group think. You don't want everybody piling on, right? But the idea that somebody that is, it'll never work, we're all going to die over and over and over, you gotta go up the chain, and you got to say, this person is being a classic obstructionist, and they've got to go. Or there's probably a project somewhere within the company that they would be perfect for, but not for the operational tempo that we're working on this project. And that's fair. It's fair to everybody. It's fair to your coworkers. It's fair to the bosses and the C-suite executives, and it's fair to that person as well, so they know how they're being received. But I would only launch that missile. I would only cut that limb off the tree when I see a pattern develop.
Yes, and I think it's very connected to self-awareness as well. Like something I was telling a friend of mine recently, because we did performance reviews, is that a person who's self-aware has no issue actually discussing the problem, to Brian's point, and like saying, okay, this is what I need to develop. I seek the constructive feedback because I know what the company goal is, for example, and I don't take it personally. Versus when you're not self-aware, you tend to find it as a threat. Say, oh, what are you saying? I didn't do this right. Oh no, it's your problem. Like, it's your fault. And I think it's really going down to self-awareness, and situations like this, that is a small like crisis, can really tell who has self-awareness and who doesn't.
I would agree.
I wish more people did.
Yeah, that it would be a little bit easier if we all knew our own flaws and personal things. But that's a good point to bring up, is, because we're in the realm of human behavior, and people always want to know about reading the situation, reading human behavior. And a lot of it too, everything we teach and talk about, it's an external skill set, but really it's an internal one as well. Like you got to look at yourself in the mirror and say, all right, maybe I'm the problem in this situation. And just having that, it allows you to see things a little bit clearer.
Right. And I think another problem is that maybe organizations don't create the right environment for people to explore that and become self-aware, or feel like it's okay to say that they don't have all the skills required, but they're willing to try and improve them. So how can you think individuals create those safe spaces, inclusive environments, to encourage open communication, idea sharing, and just discussing, even when there is a failure, and turning it into a lesson, rather than saying, oh no, this is terrible, now you have to be fired?
Yeah. And you know what, I'll go international on this one again. So we've operated in 53 countries. We've had every form of barrier, from combat to language to, anything that you could imagine, sickness, for example, the COVID, which strictly limits how people can communicate in person, right? So the idea is that everything is conflict resolution. We call it the ABCD: always, be, consider, and de-escalation. Why? Because we are programmed as humans to reduce problems and anxiety in an environment so we can go along to get along. The idea is the outcome. We're outcomes based. And so if we find that there's a ripple there, we got to fix it. And look, effective communication is important in problem solving, conflict resolution, and to create and foster an inclusive idea sharing environment. That's how we win. So it's your job as a leader to reduce the stress and anxiety, the turbidity associated with the interpersonal interactions. And I've had bosses tell me, well, an open door policy. Well, an open door policy is not enough. You have to actively seek out opportunities to engage with your personnel daily or weekly, whatever your schedule allows, and have impromptu meetings, and then start by encouraging them, look, speak openly on this topic, and then actually letting them speak. Don't give a guided discussion, have them talk. If I'm going to give you the forum and I'm going to give you the microphone, then talk, right? And when you're speaking, the more open that team feels, the better and more superfluous, I think, the ideas are going to start coming back to you, and they'll start to pitch in, and they'll start to pitch you on new ideas. And you only need, as a leader, to add repercussions or throw in the towel when you see or hear bad behavior. There is no place for backstabbing or bullying or bad behavior in either written communication or in face-to-face meetings. That's a non-starter. And you have to lay that out early, and you have to lay that out often. Keep your emotions in check. This is about the issue at hand. So finally, I would say, tell them to work on expressing their ideas to you rather than impressing their ideas to you. I want information from you that I can capitalize on in my next meeting. I don't need a flashy PowerPoint slide or a word that you have to look up in a dictionary because I don't fully understand it, or a damn fashion show. I need the information that I can process into intelligence to move forward. And you're a key component to that.
Yeah.
And I got to let you know that up front. I got to let you know that early.
I love that because it really empowers leaders and it makes them understand how much of an impact they can have. But how about people that are not in leadership positions? Do they have a role in creating the right environment for communication with Clarice? And if so, can you give some examples?
Yeah, absolutely. So even if being a leader you don't have to be in a leadership position with a leadership title to be a leader, right? You can be a thought leader. You can be, someone that people look up to in the office or at the organization. It doesn't matter. And leadership is huge. Technically, you could boil everything down if you really wanted to into leadership. That's why, the top selling books at any given time, there's probably 10 or 15 leadership ones on there, and there's new ones coming out every day or every week, right? And why? Because it's such a powerful topic and it really shapes everything about it. And so you don't, again, like I said, you don't have to be in the actual leadership role to be a leader. And sometimes a lot of leadership is just about being vulnerable. So Greg gave all these great examples, but then how do I do that as a leader? Is what I would do in leadership positions, let's say, especially when I was in the military, we did a training mission or a real life mission, we do a debrief afterwards. You go over everything that happened and we do an after action review. Well, as a leader, guess what? I go first and I say, hey, here's what I did wrong. Here's all of the things that I screwed up on my end, right? That either, that hindered the mission or didn't set you up for success. And if I do that as a leader, what that's showing to everyone on the team, especially the youngest, newest member of that team, maybe who is scared to say something, right? They're now going, well, if he's willing to admit when he made a mistake, then it's okay for me to. And then that's when you really get that communication. But showing vulnerability and holding yourself accountable as the leader, that's huge. That builds that trust within that organization, within your team. And now they know, okay, they're not afraid to fail, because you have to let people fail sometimes, or they have to be confident knowing that if they do, it's okay. They're going to have the rest of the team get their back. And so I just say being accountable to yourself and really being vulnerable to everyone else on the team. You don't have to have the right answer all the time. It's okay to say, I don't know. Like, I'm not sure. I'm going to find out. And that's okay. People respect that, right? They appreciate that. They don't, not coming to you for every single solution. So I think just exposing yourself in that manner, right, and being vulnerable is a huge way to do that. And even if you're not in an actual leadership position.
Yeah, and I would add, first of all, Brian, great, I would say empowering others to step up into that is part of your mentorship goal in any organization. So I would think of Alaska, I would think of the Iditarod, and we always say lead dog in the sled. If you're not the lead dog, the view doesn't change much. Well, that's a great bit of word salad and a play on words. But you know who's the real leader? The guy back there with the whip and with the ropes. But if each person isn't giving 100%, then the sled is never going to make it to the finish line. So I can lead from the side. I can lead from the back. The idea is, what am I doing today to make sure that we're all paddling in the right direction or mushing in the right direction to actually get there. And that's the function of, that's the role of any high functioning team, is to look down and in before they start looking up and out. So I absolutely agree with Brian's take on that.
Yeah, great example. In my opinion, I mean, this resonates with me because I very much believe in rewarding when people like get out of their comfort zone, even if they fail. It's only the fact that they're trying to go forward is actually commendable. And I mean, Dextego is created based on that idea too, the engineering of micro challenges in your day-to-day to get out of your comfort zone, to learn over time, exponentially more than if every day was smooth and there was no challenge. But I was recently at a conference where I talked about the notion of, not being afraid to fail. And a colleague shared an interesting perspective, which is that this generation is actually too soft. Like, we reward everyone all the time, like kids, for instance, going to school, playing sports, everyone gets a diploma for participation. What's your opinion about the different generations and the way they learn or they experience like failure?
That's a great question. I know that, so that idea of that, oh, this generation, they have it so easy, that goes back thousands and thousands of years, right?
Everybody says it, right?
Everyone's always been saying that, right? So I always keep that into mind. But there are generational differences in terms of learning and communication and how we do things, of course. So the saying is, young men make war, old men make peace. And what it is, the younger you are, the more you're full of everything and you want to get stuff done and you've got all these great ideas. And then you have the sage gray beards, or, up above going, well, hang on here. We've done this before in the past, right? We've gone down that road, maybe not how you see it. So balancing that out. But in terms of learning, because the younger you are, the more technology you're raised on, you're used to looking at a screen. One, it's more comfortable for you. But what have we had to do? Because we're talking about miscommunication. So now we have to have things like emojis and GIFs and memes and all that stuff. Why? Because, well, those text messages, those emails, that does not transmit the message very clearly sometimes, right? And everything could be taken out of context. So while the younger is obviously going to be able to engage with and use technology a little bit more easily, the older generation might not, right? And so that same process comes to kind of learning. Like what I've seen is a younger generation, they're just like, all right, well, just give me the takeaway, give me the one line, give me this one thing I have to know. But that's not everything, right? The quote that you post isn't about the quote, right? It's not about the image. It's about the power behind it and the meaning behind it. So I think what it looks like to me is kind of the younger generation gets more focused on just the little tidbit. I just want this little bit, where the older generation said, really, well, you have to dive into each one of these topics. These are actual big things. I mean, we're still, thousands of years ago, people were talking about how to communicate more effectively, and we're still doing it today. Now we're trying to do it over this Zoom webinar thing, you know what I mean? So that adds in a whole bunch of complexity to it. So really finding our way in that is, I think, is an ongoing process, right? So I fall back on what's always stood the test of time. What are some basic tenets that have always worked generationally? And then how do I use those across this new medium or way of doing things? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and you know what I would add, and again, great concise point, Brian. I would add that I'm not a fan of entitlement, because it's not a way to propel the entire team forward. It's a bunch of individuals that are taking a lot of time pecking at individual things on the ground like chickens, and not really producing much in the way of teamwork. And so I'll give you an example of that. Think of archaeology. When you excavate archaeology, you find good ideas and you find the bad ideas. The bad ideas are surrounded by skeletal remains. Okay, there's a whole bunch of them over here and not so many over there. And that's how we see advancement. So what am I trying to say? You have to be a part of a team and of a group and of a society for us to ever make any kind of endeavor possible and successful. So when you're sitting there thinking, hey, we hear it all the time in the government, I've got 35 years on and I'm just hanging on till I can retire. Well, you're doing nobody any good. So, if you're retired in place, you might as well take that exit out and let some new blood get in. So what's the problem? Is every new blood is like a Benetton commercial. They all think they got the answers, and it's a bunch of young kids with their arms crossed with a chip on their shoulder saying, get out of the way. Well, we're not done yet. We'll move when there's a little bit of a gap from all that older wood up ahead of us moving out of the way. So I agree with Brian's perspective as well, that it's a log jam. every generation forms them by looking back rather than by looking forward.
Yes, and I think it is a challenge that like people I see now in the workplace face, because I had, for instance, an employee who was in his 50s come to me, ask me like how he can better improve the communication with the younger generation, like the younger managers, because he could see in action the difficulty in conveying his message. And it can be complicated, I think, especially when an organization also creates their own culture, like their lingo, and then you have someone come in as a new hire. It's a lot to explore. On top of that, in a virtual world, like it can get tough. And I think people like in HR, or anyone that works in the culture side, I think need to also just acknowledge that this is a challenge across the board. Like you can't just fix communication in humans like suddenly because of your role. It's just something we all have to kind of work towards. But I'm curious, because you shared some very interesting examples, if you can share some more anonymously from like your clients' experiences, maybe some success stories that you have identified with them when it comes to breaking those silos, first at an individual level and at the company level, to understand basically improvements in team dynamics and overall productivity once they got addressed.
Yeah, I'll start, Brian, and I'll pitch it to you if that's okay.
Yeah.
So Brian and I were working with a bunch of C-suite executives in a federal setting. And so we're setting up in this 3-hour-long preparatory strike for a major Beltway meeting that was coming on. And I don't think anybody on the phone had less than 25 years of service in the federal sector. And not one of them had any idea how to get up from their desk and walk out of their office and engage a peer or a non-peer or a near peer just to check up on them. So how are you doing today? Hey, you ready to go to that meeting with me? How's the family holding up? I know this has been a long project. None of them could do it. And they were all looking to us. How do I break the ice? How do I introduce myself? And to me, that's madcap. I can't imagine that. So they forgot that management is about tools or about products or about property or a desk. Leadership is about engaging with people. And that's got to be job one. You're never going to get to the finish line if you don't take everybody on your team with you. Do you have to kick some to the curb once in a while? Yep, but that's a rarity and only when they're hindering operations.
Yeah, we this is kind of brings into a number of the stuff that we brought up, but we were working with we'll just say one of the major airlines, and one of the issues was at the level we were at is kind of people got lost in what their role was in the organization. So they'd been in a long time, but they weren't really at the strategic level in terms of the business operations of this company. They were top of their game maybe at whatever they did in that organization, and they were one of the head people at the company, but they took it on as almost they were now part of the strategic vision and plan of the company. And what they were really there to do was to inform those leaders, those business decisions about how their decisions would affect, right, this whole massive part of that organization. So that, the head pilot for the organization is there to talk and speak for all pilots of that organization. So what happened is everyone kind of got a little bit lost in their roles. And so it created a little bit of turbidity where people thought they were putting in input that wasn't really their job to do. And that comes with sort of expectation management. So me at an organization, I need to know what's expected of me. I need to know what my roles and responsibilities are. And then two, if I'm thinking of that from a leadership position, I have to communicate that effectively to all of my employees. Hey, here's what you're expected to do, right? Here's why you're here. This is your specific role. Now you can get into the details of the roles and responsibilities, but what the big point to focus on is here's how your role impacts our organization. So that way, whether I'm at that frontline tactical or functional level, I know how my decisions play all the way in at the top because of how connected we are now as a society. You're the gate agent at an airport and you do something wrong. Well, that's all over social media and you affect the business operations of that entire company. I mean, things happen so quickly and so fast now, is that everyone has to be clear on how their role impacts the overall strategic mission of the company. And that also gives those employees sort of some leeway to understand what decisions they can make, right? If they know, well, wait a minute, maybe I probably shouldn't say that or do that because that's not really within my role. I should stay right here. Or, hey, I can go above and beyond this because I know this isn't really my role, but this fits within the strategic vision of the company. And I know senior leadership would absolutely approve this. So that gives them that autonomy and that confidence to make better decisions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there is this book I recently read called Traction, and it talks about the EOS system that we're currently implementing, and it has to do with what you're saying, like having very clear goals, breaking down like the org chart, clear goals per person, per department, so that when time comes, like for a performance review, it's very black and white. Did we complete our goals? Did we not? Why? And I think it's also important to keep a weekly cadence, like we have to come back to these goals all the time to just bring everyone like on the same page, because I think on an org scale, it's so easy for teams by default to create silos due to their level of performance. Like some maybe team members are more of high performers than others, so they're driving things forward and the others aren't, and then it's so easy to lose some people. But when you bring them back again and again, I think it's like not just a team bonding exercise, but it's bringing up like fuel, because now there's clarity. And especially like someone like a CEO that has to do so much on a day-to-day can forget to do that. So I think there's always someone that needs to be appointed that role of just bring back the focus. Like it is really a dedicated thing. I believe you take any company and you can see how they might start very motivated, and then over time, because of the difficulties that arise, the motivation goes down. It's harder, and then the same startup, something happens like external, like maybe you get funded, maybe you get like a good client, and then you go up again. But it's a cycle. You need to maintain that motivation, or else you'll die as a company.
Spot on. And it's like the vegetables when you go to City Market. If they don't have that sprayer on once in a while, they're not rotating those out and selling them or giving them away, then they're going to rot on the vine. And the problem with that, I walk into offices to counsel people on being good leaders, and I see a dry erase board that's had the same information in the same places for months. Well, that's called a poster. And if it's been 6 months or more, that's called a painting or a picture. We don't need that. You need to go in there and you need to shake the things up every day. And you need to erase that and say, what's our vision for right now? Where are we standing along this continuum? And what do we need to do to get up over this next hill? If you're not constantly doing that, then you're stagnating. And you've got to be innovative, and you've got to have enough temerity to put up with some of those challenges and be able to walk into that room. And like Brian says, be vulnerable, but also be a leader. You don't have to be in charge to be a leader. A thought leader is just as important to the success of the company.
Right. Awesome. So kind of towards the end here, I have a question that I think is connected to everything we discussed, and it's focused on trust. How can individuals foster trust among their team members, especially when working in different functions and remote? Maybe you can say for in-person and remote too, but I'm super curious about that. I think trust is very hard to build.
Yeah.
So trust is a big one, and that goes back to even what I was saying about being vulnerable, right? If I show you that I'm willing to be vulnerable in front of you, I'm starting to build trust, because you're seeing me for me as a person, that I'm okay with expressing what my faults were or where I messed up, and holding myself accountable for that. So building trust is always something that's going to take time. So it's simple. I always say, did you do what you said you were going to do? Did you say what you were going to do? Did you do what you said you were going to do? Right? It works sort of both ways in a sense. And then if it's, hey, I'm going to get back to you by this time, after a while, if I don't meet that, because maybe even I'm just busy and I have legitimate excuses, I'm starting to erode trust in that person, because I said I gave them some expectation of what I was going to do, and I didn't meet their expectation. So expectation management is a huge one, and if I can manage my own, I can manage someone else's. But trust is something that just builds with time by consistently being who I said I was going to be, and consistently doing what I'm supposed to do, and that consistency over time. And once you build that trust, it's kind of harder then to actually break that trust. I mean, you can that will last much longer.
Perfect. Greg, did you have something to add?
No, I absolutely agree. When I climb into a car and there's a rope for a seatbelt, I don't trust it as much as the shoulder harness. You can tell which organizations are damaged just by walking in and speaking to the first couple of people that you see and looking around on the walls. Totally agree.
Perfect. So my last question is, what would be, out of everything we discussed today, some key takeaways, some actionable insights the audience can take when it comes to implementing right ways to improve communication, contributing to breaking down those silos in their organizations, but maybe also in their personal life, who knows?
Yeah, and I would, Brian, if I can just throw in,
go for it.
absolutely everything we talk about, if it's not useful in your day-to-day, when you're answering the phone at home, when you're at your kid's soccer game, or at work, or on the way to work, when you stop to 7-Eleven for gas or a Slurpee, if it's not working in all those places, change channels, go to get somebody else. That's why we formed a strategic partnership with Dextego, is because they're thinking downfield as we are thinking downfield. I would say this, my thing would be open to feedback, encourage feedback from absolutely every level of everybody that you met in the company, and make sure that you're not playing favorites. And what I mean by playing favorites, an old combat and a cop thing, if you get in an ambush or a firefight, the leader on the ground is thinking, who do I have out there? And they're going, I have Shell House out there on the ground. And you're going, okay, send Marren, get Marren on a bus and get him out to the scene as soon as possible. Okay. Rather than develop the person and allow for that growth. Now I find out who's at the scene. Well, Marren's at the scene. Well, send him anything he wants. And Marren gets more time with me and more money, and he gets all those other things that the company now has created a silo in stride over time on a project that could have been a great challenging project to mentor some young employees or some in the intermediate managers to get them up to playing in the major league. So I would say avoid that at all costs. Don't play favorites. Sorry, Brian.
No, and I'll actually, with what Greg said right when he started, was these aren't, work skills, they're life skills, right? They're communication skills. So, I use it with my wife and my kids and everything I can, because understanding these little just little elements that I can think about help me understand the question. It's like we brought up in there, one, always make it about the problem, not about the person. And, people want their say, not their way. Most people just want to get it off their chest, whatever it is they're thinking or feeling. They want to complain about their dinner that wasn't good enough for them. They want to complain about something. They want to bring up a topic that may be meaningless to you, but it's important to them. So sometimes just giving people their say is going to get you a lot further in that conversation, because now they're engaged and now they feel that their opinion is valued. And so, like Greg said, any skill that you learn and taking this through here, especially with the Dextego app, is where else can I apply this? Can I apply this,
right,
talking to the manager at that busy restaurant because I'm trying to get a better table? Can I use it when talking to my significant other? Can I use it, at the grocery store with, we're trying to get something from one of the people working there? Whatever the situation is, it doesn't matter. If I look at them as life skills, I'll start to apply them everywhere in my life.
I love it. I would add that I think small changes or like small behaviors can have huge impacts. Like, to your point about being vulnerable, it can be as simple as you going to your colleague and asking them, hey, how was your weekend? Mine was
exactly,
bad because XYZ. So it could be very small things that no matter your role, you can really change the organizational culture with.
That's a really good point, because small,
absolutely.
subtle changes over time, that's actually what your brain prefers, right? And it's easier to implement long-term change, right? If you're going to do all right, it's January 1st, I'm on a new diet, I'm going to the gym, I'm going to lose that weight. What happens by February or March? All those people are gone now,
Right.
Because you tried to do too much at once. It's just do one thing today, this week. Okay, once you've got that down, then add the next one, then add the next one. And then slowly over time, those small, subtle changes, your brain doesn't even really notice it. And then by the time, it's a few months later, it's just become part of who you are and what you do. And so if I just look at those small things, like you said, if I just have that quick 5-minute conversation with everyone today, well, then that's going to lead to something even bigger 3 months from now.
Right. And lastly, that self-awareness is behind all those soft skills, life skills. As we said, actually, there's studies that say self-awareness is the #1 key when you're looking for emotional intelligence in people. You can't really be able to adapt like your communication style if you don't know what your communication style is. So I would like to leave us with that. And I would like to thank you both so much for all your insights and great conversation today. I had lots of fun.
Thank you for having us on. We appreciate it. We're excited about the relationship with
Absolutely.
Dextego.
I hope this is the first of many. I hope it's
Yes.
popular with your clients.
Awesome. Thank you so much, guys. We'll speak soon. Take
Thank
care.
you.
Thank you.
Okay.